A single piece of parchment clutched in the trembling hands of Queen Elizabeth's most trusted advisors held secrets so devastating they would haunt the English court forever. As the Virgin Queen lay cold in her chambers at Richmond Palace, this mysterious letter emerged from her private belongings, its contents so shocking that grown men reportedly wept upon reading it. What earth-shattering revelation could have possessed such terrifying power? Did this final confession reveal the truth behind her sudden demise, or perhaps expose something far more sinister that had been festering in the shadows of the Tudor court for decades? If you're fascinated by the hidden dark truths behind history's most iconic figures, smash that like button and subscribe. We're diving deep into the stories that textbooks never dared to tell, uncovering the deadly secrets that shaped the fate of nations. To understand the true horror of what that letter might have contained, we must journey back to where this tragic tale began. The year was 1533, marked one of history's most tumultuous periods, and Elizabeth Tudor's very birth ignited the most explosive scandal of the age. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, was the enigmatic woman who had supposedly bewitched King Henry VIII with such supernatural power that he willingly shattered his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and defied the Pope himself. This earth-shattering divorce didn't just destroy a royal marriage, it triggered the English Reformation and forever altered the religious landscape of an entire nation. But this was merely the opening act of a tragedy that would define Elizabeth's entire existence. The harsh reality of Tudor court life revealed itself with brutal clarity when the infant princess was barely old enough to understand the concept of family. Not many souls in this world can claim the horrific distinction that their own father orchestrated their mother's execution, yet this nightmarish reality became Elizabeth's defining childhood trauma. Anne Boleyn, who had once held Henry VIII so completely in her thrall, fell from grace with devastating swiftness when she failed to produce the male heir that obsessed the king's every waking moment. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn walked to the scaffold with dignity intact, but her head would soon roll at her husband's command. Elizabeth, barely 2 years old, was suddenly motherless in the most violent way imaginable. The cruel machinery of royal succession moved with shocking efficiency. Just 11 days after Anne's execution, Henry VIII had already installed Jane Seymour as his new queen, as if erasing one woman and replacing her with another was as simple as changing clothes. Jane Seymour's triumph came in the form of a son, Edward, born just 1 year after her marriage to Henry VIII. This baby boy represented everything that had eluded the king through 2 previous marriages, the male heir who would secure the Tudor dynasty's future. For young Elizabeth, Edward's birth carried a devastating message. She was not enough, had never been enough, and her very existence as a daughter rather than a son had contributed to her mother's doom. Growing up in such a turbulent court, witnessing horrifying betrayals and executions from her earliest years, Elizabeth faced pressures that would have crushed most adults, let alone a child. But perhaps the greatest pressure she would ever face came later, once she claimed the throne and discovered that maintaining the image of a strong, unshakable monarch required sacrifices that would ultimately destroy her from within. The beauty standards of 16th century English aristocracy were not merely preferences, they were rigid requirements that could make or break a woman's social standing. The ideal of feminine perfection demanded skin like fresh snow, porcelain white and smooth as marble, symbolizing not just beauty, but nobility, elegance, and divine favor. This wasn't simply vanity. For a queen, appearance was political power made visible. Then fate delivered a crushing blow that would haunt Elizabeth for the rest of her days. In 1562, smallpox struck the royal court with merciless fury, and the disease showed no respect for crowns or bloodlines. Elizabeth contracted this terrible plague, and the consequences were devastating beyond imagination. The illness left her skin severely pockmarked, creating a battlefield of scars across her face and neck. Even worse, the disease rendered her nearly bald, stripping away the lustrous hair that had been one of her greatest sources of pride. For a queen whose very authority depended on commanding awe and inspiring devotion through her majestic presence, this physical devastation represented an existential crisis. How could she rule effectively when her own reflection revealed weakness and mortality? The solution seemed obvious. Makeup would become her armor, transforming her scarred reality into an illusion of perfection. But Elizabeth's chosen remedy would become her silent executioner, a slow-acting poison that she willingly applied to her own skin day after day, year after year, never suspecting that her quest for beauty was actually a death sentence carried out in increments so small she couldn't perceive the damage until it was far too late. Queen Elizabeth's signature ghostly appearance, that legendary porcelain-white complexion that made her seem almost supernatural, was achieved through a cosmetic called Venetian ceruse. The name sounds elegant and sophisticated, befitting royalty, but the reality was far more sinister. This miracle makeup consisted primarily of white lead mixed with vinegar, creating a thick paste that could transform any complexion into an otherworldly canvas of perfection. The application process was deceptively simple. Elizabeth would coat her face and neck with thick layers of this substance, building up coverage so complete that even the deepest smallpox scars vanished beneath its transformative power. The covering ability was indeed incredible, turning her damaged skin into what appeared to be flawless porcelain. However, the cosmetic carried an unpleasant side effect. It smelled distinctly of sour wine, a constant reminder of the vinegar base that made the mixture spreadable. But the danger lurking in Elizabeth's beauty routine extended far beyond white lead. Historical records reveal that she also used products containing mercury, that other deadly heavy metal that promised cosmetic miracles while delivering toxic destruction. She applied mercury-based substances to her lips, seeking that perfect rosy hue that would complement her ghostly complexion. Even more alarmingly, evidence suggests she used makeup removers containing mercury, substances that could literally corrode human flesh over time. Modern scientific understanding reveals the true horror of what Elizabeth was doing to herself. Lead and mercury are heavy metals with devastating toxicity, capable of causing serious and often irreversible health problems that compound over time. Long-term exposure to lead results in hair loss, progressive skin deterioration, neurological damage, and ultimately death from lead poisoning. Mercury attacks with equal viciousness, systematically destroying the nervous system and internal organs while the victim remains largely unaware of the mounting damage. Queen Elizabeth used these toxic cosmetics religiously for decades. As she aged and became increasingly desperate to maintain a youthful appearance, she likely applied them in ever greater quantities, creating a vicious cycle where her attempts to look healthier actually accelerated her physical decline. Her body was becoming literally toxic, poisoned by her own vanity and the impossible beauty standards of her era. Could her most closely guarded beauty secret have been the very thing that was silently murdering her with each passing day? The irony is both tragic and profound. The Virgin Queen, who sacrificed everything for England, may have ultimately sacrificed her life for the illusion of eternal youth and perfection. Of course, toxic cosmetics represent just one potential cause of Elizabeth's eventual death. Historical sources suggest other possibilities, including cancer and pneumonia, both common and frequently fatal diseases during that era. The truth may involve a combination of factors, with her poisonous beauty routine weakening her system and making her more vulnerable to other illnesses. Elizabeth's health began declining noticeably during the autumn of 1602. She grew increasingly frail and withdrew from public life, spending more time alone in her private chambers. A deep melancholy settled over her spirit, partly caused by witnessing the deaths of dear friends who had shared her journey through decades of rule. The death of Catherine Carey in February 1603 hit her particularly hard, removing one of the last connections to her younger, more optimistic years. But there was another name that tormented her thoughts during those final months, a ghost that refused to rest peacefully in her memory: Robert Dudley, Earl of Essex. This man had been more than just another courtier or political ally. He had been her final, most dangerous love affair, and his violent end continued to haunt her conscience years after his execution. A courtier recorded in 1602 that the Queen found comfort in sitting alone in darkened rooms, sometimes shedding tears while she mourned Essex. The pain of losing her lover, combined with the torment of knowing she had ordered his death, undoubtedly inflicted severe damage on both her mental and physical health. During her final months, Elizabeth refused to allow doctors to examine her. Perhaps she instinctively understood that medical professionals would only confirm what she already suspected. Her body was failing, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop the inevitable decline. Alternatively, her legendary pride and fierce independence may have simply rebelled against showing weakness or vulnerability to anyone, even those sworn to help her. One shocking detail about her final days reveals the depth of her psychological distress. Elizabeth refused to lie down, convinced with absolute certainty that horizontal rest would mean death. This strange but powerful belief forced her to remain standing for 15 consecutive hours, while her devoted ladies-in-waiting arranged pillows around her, preparing to catch their queen if she collapsed from exhaustion. Finally, on March 24, 1603, Queen Elizabeth I passed away at Richmond Palace at the age of 69. Her glorious 45-year reign had come to an end, marking the conclusion of the Tudor dynasty that had dominated English politics for over a century. But to truly understand this remarkable woman and the mystery of that terrifying letter, we must examine the complex web of relationships that defined her personal life. Queen Elizabeth I earned worldwide recognition through her title, the Virgin Queen, a designation that suggested she had remained pure and untouched by romantic entanglements throughout her entire life. She famously rejected marriage proposals from European princes and nobles, declaring with apparent sincerity that she was married to England and that only England deserved her complete devotion and love. However, the reality of her personal life was infinitely more complex and scandalous than this pristine image suggested. In her youth, Elizabeth possessed stunning beauty, graceful poise, and sophisticated knowledge of fashion and cosmetics that made her the magnetic center of attention at every social gathering. Her charm and intelligence captivated dozens of powerful men who were willing to risk everything for even the possibility of winning her favor. Among her most persistent suitors were figures of immense political importance, including King Philip II of Spain and King Eric XIV of Sweden. These weren't casual admirers, but serious contenders for her hand in marriage, men who could have provided political alliances that might have reshaped European history. Yet Elizabeth showed no indifference to their pursuit, and historical evidence reveals that the men who passed through her romantic life were neither few nor insignificant. The first prominent figure in Elizabeth's love life was Robert Dudley, her childhood friend from infancy, who had shared her early years in the uncertain world of Tudor court politics. Right from the first months after she ascended the throne, persistent rumors circulated about the Queen's intimate relationship with Dudley. What made this situation particularly scandalous was that Dudley was already married at the time, yet his relationship with Elizabeth was so flagrantly public that everyone at court understood the Queen favored him with exceptional privileges. Elizabeth granted Dudley the title of Earl of Leicester and allowed him unprecedented access to her private chambers, permitting him to enter her bedroom at any hour, regardless of protocol or propriety. This level of intimacy was shocking by the standards of the era and fueled endless speculation about the true nature of their relationship. In 1560, a mysterious and tragic event changed everything. Robert Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, died from what appeared to be a fatal fall down a staircase. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspicious enough to spark gruesome rumors throughout England and Europe that the Queen and her lover had conspired to murder the inconvenient wife who stood between them and potential marriage. Despite the scandal and whispered accusations of murder, Elizabeth and Dudley continued their close, intimate relationship for many years afterward, yet remarkably the Queen never once seriously considered marrying him, despite having numerous opportunities to do so. Some historians believe that Robert Dudley remained Elizabeth's first and truest love, the one man who could have inspired her to abandon her political calculations in favor of personal happiness. When Dudley finally remarried in 1578, Elizabeth's heart opened to another man who would prove even more dangerous to her peace of mind. In 1579, she began a courtship with François, Duke of Anjou, the younger brother of King Henry III of France. He had been introduced to the English court specifically for the Queen to evaluate as a potential husband, representing a politically advantageous marriage that could strengthen England's position in European affairs. However, this relationship seemed remarkably unequal from the beginning. Anjou was a young man of approximately 20 years, while Elizabeth was significantly older and more experienced in both politics and romance. He possessed a small, unimpressive stature and bore facial scars, likely from smallpox, that detracted from his physical appeal. Additionally, persistent rumors circulated about his unusual personal preferences and questionable character. Despite these obvious disadvantages, Queen Elizabeth appeared to develop genuine affection and interest in François. She even demonstrated her fondness through the charming gesture of naming her pet frog after him, a detail that reveals her capacity for playful affection even in middle age. However, this potential marriage faced fierce and overwhelming opposition from the English public, who viewed a French Catholic alliance with deep suspicion and hostility. After several weeks of negotiations and courtship, Anjou returned to France, apparently accepting that the political obstacles were insurmountable. But in October 1581, he returned to England, much to Elizabeth's obvious delight. In a surprising and unprecedented move, she announced publicly that she would indeed marry him. The declaration shocked the court, and she even went so far as to exchange rings with Anjou and display open affection before the entire assembled nobility. Yet after just one night of this public engagement, Elizabeth herself abruptly broke off the arrangement. This dramatic reversal seemed to convince the English court that their queen would never marry and produce children, effectively ending decades of speculation about the succession and Elizabeth's romantic future. She continued to have other relationships afterward, but none reached the serious level of potential marriage. These men remained lovers and favorites who received titles and privileges but never achieved the status of husband. They were political tools as much as romantic partners, serving Elizabeth's need for both emotional connection and strategic advantage. The last and most well-documented love affair in Elizabeth's life proved to be her most dangerous and ultimately tragic. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, entered her romantic orbit as a young man of remarkable charm and devastating consequences. Notably, he was the stepson of Robert Dudley through his mother's remarriage, creating an almost incestuous connection to Elizabeth's first great love. This relationship was particularly notable due to the shocking age gap that scandalized even the relatively permissive Tudor court. Essex was merely 22 years old when their improper relationship began in 1589, while Elizabeth was 56, a difference of over 3 decades that made their affair seem almost predatory by modern standards. The young Earl possessed undeniable physical attractiveness, quick wit, and what appeared to be complete devotion to his queen. He seemed to worship Elizabeth with the intensity of youth, writing passionate letters and composing poetry that praised her beauty and wisdom. For an aging woman facing her own mortality, such adoration must have been intoxicating. The true nature of their relationship remains shrouded in historical mystery. But Elizabeth's reaction to Essex's marriage reveals the depth of her emotional investment. When she learned that Essex had secretly married Frances Walsingham in 1590, the Queen flew into a towering rage that terrified the entire court. Her jealousy was so intense and public that it left no doubt about her romantic feelings for the young Earl. Essex attempted to appease her fury by writing elaborate poems praising the Queen's beauty and virtue, trying to convince her that his marriage was merely a political necessity that didn't diminish his devotion to her. From 1591 onward, Elizabeth began involving her favourite more deeply in state affairs, entrusting him with significant military responsibilities that would ultimately prove disastrous for both of them. Elizabeth's decision to mix personal and political matters in this way greatly displeased her experienced advisors, who recognized the danger of allowing romantic feelings to influence matters of national importance. With childlike arrogance, Essex enjoyed the Queen's favour and exploited her capricious behaviour, which alternated between jealousy, passion, and excessive generosity. He became increasingly arrogant and presumptuous in his behaviour, apparently believing that his hold over Elizabeth's heart made him untouchable. This dangerous misconception reached its climax in 1597 when, upon being appointed Master of the Ordnance, he behaved so disrespectfully that Elizabeth lost her temper completely. She slapped him across the face in front of the entire court and shouted, "Go and be hanged!" Yet even this public humiliation seemed unable to break her emotional attachment to him. However, Essex's military capabilities proved to be catastrophically poor, a fact that would ultimately seal his doom. In 1598, he received appointment as Lord Lieutenant of Ireland and was dispatched with 16,000 soldiers to suppress the ongoing rebellion led by Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone. This assignment represented a crucial test of his competence and loyalty. The results were nothing short of disastrous. Essex suffered repeated defeats against the poorly equipped rebel forces, demonstrating tactical incompetence that embarrassed England on the international stage. On September 6, 1599, he was forced to sign a humiliating truce with the Earl of Tyrone, an act that was widely viewed as a crushing defeat for English prestige and military honour. Essex's final reckless action led to consequences that no amount of royal favour could overcome. On the morning of September 28, 1599, at precisely 10 o'clock, Essex burst into the palace wearing his dirty riding boots, still covered in mud from his hasty journey from Ireland. He strode purposefully through the corridors, pushing past bewildered servants and ignoring all protocols, driven by desperation to reach Elizabeth before news of his failures could poison her mind against him. His destination was the Queen's private bedchamber, the most sacred and protected space in the entire palace. There he encountered Queen Elizabeth in a state that no male subject had ever been permitted to witness, without makeup, without jewelry, without any of the elaborate constructions that created her public image. He saw simply a frail, 66-year-old woman who had just awakened, vulnerable and human, in a way that shattered the carefully maintained illusion of royal divinity. This violation of her privacy and dignity was unforgivable. Elizabeth immediately expelled Essex from her presence and ordered his imprisonment. He faced trial for his military failures in Ireland and was stripped of all offices and honours on June 3, 1600. However, Elizabeth's lingering affection led to his eventual release, a mercy that would prove to be a terrible mistake. Essex catastrophically abused the Queen's leniency. In February 1601, he took an even more insane and treasonous step. Along with a group of fellow conspirators and adventurers, Essex formulated a plan to seize the Tower of London and other key fortifications, demanding that Elizabeth appoint him as Protector of England with virtually unlimited power. This rebellion failed completely and swiftly, but it represented such a fundamental betrayal that even Elizabeth's deep personal feelings could not overcome her duty to England. She had finally run out of patience with her reckless lover, and the consequences would be swift and final. On February 24th, 1601, Essex received his death sentence for high treason. Queen Elizabeth issued a statement that would be remembered throughout history for its combination of personal pain and royal duty. "All that he has done against myself I can pardon, but I cannot pardon anyone who attempts to harm England." Without hesitation, she immediately signed the death warrant. The next day, February 25th, 1601, Essex was beheaded right outside the palace walls, his blood staining the ground where he had once walked as Elizabeth's most favored courtier. The execution marked not only the end of his life, but also the death of Elizabeth's capacity for romantic love. Looking back at Elizabeth's complex romantic history, the compelling question remains, why did she absolutely refuse to marry? Although many powerful and attractive men were captivated by her charm and beauty, and she clearly was not indifferent to their attention, she ultimately chose a solitary life that lasted until her final breath. The reason for this decision remains one of history's most intriguing unsolved mysteries. When Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603, she left behind no direct heir, marking the definitive end of the Tudor dynasty that had ruled England through over a century of unprecedented upheaval and transformation. The successor to her throne was King James VI of Scotland, who became King James I of England, representing a significant historical milestone that united the two kingdoms under a single crown for the first time. Elizabeth's remarkable 45-year reign is universally called the Golden Age of English history, a period when the nation achieved brilliant accomplishments in culture, arts, literature, and naval power. This was the era of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and the decisive defeat of the seemingly invincible Spanish Armada. England emerged from Elizabeth's reign as a true world power, respected and feared across Europe. There exists a thought-provoking historical perspective that Queen Elizabeth ultimately built an incredibly successful reign that brought England the stability and prosperity that her father, King Henry VIII, had desperately sought but never achieved. Many historians believe that this illustrious reign and Elizabeth's status as one of England's greatest monarchs represented the ultimate vindication and legacy of her mother, Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII had tried to erase Anne Boleyn from history, treating her as an embarrassing mistake to be forgotten. Yet Anne's own daughter became the most successful monarch England had ever known, building her extraordinary achievements upon the foundation of her mother's sacrifice and martyrdom. Now we return to that haunting moment when Queen Elizabeth died, and her most trusted advisors discovered the mysterious letter hidden among her personal belongings. The contents of this document sent such profound chills through these experienced courtiers that they could barely speak of what they had read. What terrifying secret could have possessed such devastating power? Could that letter have been a detailed confession about the personal secrets she had guarded so carefully throughout her life? Perhaps it contained explicit details about her intimate relationships with Robert Dudley, Essex, and others, revelations that could have destroyed reputations and rewritten historical understanding of her reign. Was it a final political testament about the fate of England, containing strategic insights or warnings about threats she had identified but never publicly discussed? Elizabeth was renowned for her political acumen, and such a document could have contained predictions or advice that her successors desperately needed. Perhaps the letter revealed the horrifying truth about how those toxic cosmetics had systematically destroyed her health from within. Imagine the horror of discovering that Elizabeth had finally understood the connection between her daily beauty routine and her declining health, yet felt powerless to stop the deadly cycle she had created. Another possibility, and perhaps what made her advisors shudder most deeply, is that the letter was related to the succession question that had haunted her entire reign. Elizabeth had steadfastly refused to publicly name a successor, maintaining this uncertainty as a form of political control. Did that final letter contain the name of her chosen heir, or perhaps reveal some secret about the succession that could have changed the course of English history? The truth about that mysterious letter died with Elizabeth, taking its secrets to the grave and leaving historians to speculate about what revelations were deemed too dangerous to survive. But perhaps that eternal mystery is fitting for a woman who spent her entire life mastering the art of concealment, maintaining public facades that hid the complex, vulnerable, and ultimately human woman beneath the crown. What do you think really happened? What earth-shattering secret did that letter contain? Share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next strange and fascinating stories from history's darkest corners, because the truth behind the legends is always more incredible than fiction.